Chapter 1. The Man Who Disappeared. It began, as most ghost stories of history do, not with a scream, but with silence. The silence of a man who simply vanished. In the chaotic twilight of 1945, as the war that had engulfed the world was finally burning itself out, countless men tried to erase themselves from history. Some hid in ruins, others behind false papers and new names. But a few, those who carried heavier secrets than the rest, set their eyes across the ocean. South America. It was more than a destination. It was a sanctuary. A place far enough from the smoking cities of Europe to begin again. Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay, each whispered like a promise to those desperate to escape the past. One of those men was known, at least before his name dissolved into legend, as Karl Brenner. A decorated officer in the later years of the war, Brenner had served in occupied territories, overseeing transport routes and, according to the surviving records, special shipments that were never found again. When the Reich fell, so did his paper trail. He slipped away under the cover of collapsing borders, traveling south by way of Italy, boarding a cargo vessel under a false identity. When the ship reached Buenos Aires, he disembarked, one among hundreds of quiet ghosts trying to start anew. For the locals, he was Don Carlos, a polite but withdrawn man who spoke fluent Spanish, carried a faint European accent, and paid for everything in cash. He bought a small property on the edge of the jungle, near the border with Paraguay, a place so quiet that the crickets at night seemed louder than the world itself. There, he lived alone. No family, no friends, just letters that came once a year and disappeared into the fire after he read them. Years became decades. The neighbors changed, the borders changed. But the man in the small house on the hill did not. He aged slowly, or perhaps he simply aged away from the world. When he died sometime in the late 1980s, no one noticed. The house fell silent again, this time without its ghost inside. For nearly 70 years, it stood untouched. The jungle swallowed it in green. The roof sagged, the doors bloated with rain, and the path leading to it vanished under roots and vines. It might have stayed that way forever, forgotten by time, if not for a group of historians and volunteers who arrived in 2015. They were part of an international effort to document Nazi flight routes, what historians now call rat lines. Using declassified intelligence files, they traced the paths of former SS officers and collaborators who had escaped to South America through secret networks aided by sympathizers and false identities. Their search led them to Brenner's name, or rather to his alias, Don Carlos Brenner, a name that hadn't appeared in any record since 1949. When they reached the property, it was like stepping into another century, a house entombed in vines, the air heavy with mold and dust. It took hours to clear the doorway. Inside, the walls were covered in peeling paint and photographs warped by time. There was an old gramophone in the corner, a rusted trunk by the bed, and shelves filled with books whose pages had fused together. But in the cellar, beneath a loose plank on the floor, they found something else. A staircase leading down. It wasn't marked on the original property plans. It wasn't part of the house. The descent was narrow, damp, and cold. The kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature, but from history. And when the first beam of light fell upon the walls below, they realized this wasn't just a cellar. It was a vault. Crates. Dozens of them. Each sealed, each marked with faint stenciled symbols. German, unmistakably. Inside, there were relics, medals, documents, uniforms, and personal effects, preserved as though someone had planned to return for them. But there was more. Behind a false wall, they found a single small room. Inside, a wooden desk. On it, a map. Europe, marked with red lines and circles drawn by hand. At the center of it, in faded ink, one word underlined twice. Prague. The discovery would soon draw the attention of international historians, investigators, and even government archives. But before any of that, before the reports, before the television headlines, it began here, in the dark, with the quiet realization that Karl Brenner had not just fled. He had been preparing for something, and what he left behind wasn't meant to be found. Chapter 2. The House in the Jungle. The jungle doesn't give up its secrets easily. Even when the team arrived that humid morning in 2015, it felt as though the air itself resisted them. The canopy hung low, a green curtain heavy with silence. Every step closer to the house was swallowed by the sound of cicadas and the dull, constant heartbeat of insects. There were 5 of them. 2 historians, a cameraman, a translator, and a local guide named Miguel, who claimed to know the land better than his own reflection. Their goal was simple: document what remained of the rumored hideout of a WW2 fugitive known as Karl Brenner. But as they cleared the path, one of the historians, Anna Keller, kept saying she felt as if they were trespassing, not exploring. The house looked almost dreamlike when it finally appeared between the trees. Its walls were a faded yellow, eaten by moss and time. Windows boarded from the inside, roof half collapsed, its chimney strangled by vines. A European house in a South American jungle, like something torn out of a dream that never belonged here. They entered slowly, recording every room. Dust coated everything like ash. Furniture sat where it had been left decades ago. Plates still stacked, a book still open on a table. The air smelled of rot and iron, the kind of scent that lingers in basements and memories. Miguel was the first to find the hidden door under the rug in the back room. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight unevenness in the floorboards. When he lifted it, the smell of earth and something older rose up. The light from their torches flickered down the wooden steps, swallowing itself in shadow. Anna hesitated before going down. Later, in interviews, she would describe the moment as a strange wait, like walking into a place that had been waiting for someone to return. The air grew colder as they descended. The steps opened into a small underground chamber, its walls reinforced with stone and clay. Boxes lined the sides, stacked neatly, untouched. On the floor, a layer of dust so thick that their footprints looked like wounds in the surface. When they pried open the first crate, they found a steel helmet wrapped in oilcloth, then medals, insignia, and a bundle of documents written in old German typeface. All of it astonishingly preserved. But it was the next box that froze them. Inside were black and white photographs, hundreds of them, each showing European towns, train stations, and people marked with handwritten codes and dates. At the bottom lay a photograph of a man, face half turned, wearing a familiar uniform. The same face they had seen on a faded identification card upstairs. Karl Brenner. He had documented everything, not just his escape, but something far more deliberate. Anna noticed the small false wall behind the crates. When they removed it, the narrow room revealed itself, a kind of private office. There, on the desk, sat the map of Europe with Prague circled in red, surrounded by smaller notations written in a hurried hand. A drawer beneath held a rusted key in a sealed metal box no larger than a loaf of bread. The box was locked. When they eventually forced it open, the lid creaked like a breath being released after decades. Inside were personal effects, a wedding ring, a letter written in German, and something that would later ignite weeks of controversy. A stack of documents bearing the insignia of the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi research division. The letter was signed, dated 1949. It was addressed not to anyone in Argentina, but to a name traced back to Paraguay, and beneath it, a symbol, one the historians recognized instantly, the sigil of an organization believed to have continued its operations underground long after the war ended. What they realized then was chilling. Karl Brenner hadn't just been hiding, he had been guarding something. The rest of the day blurred. They photographed everything, sealed the items, and contacted both local authorities and international experts. But the site was isolated, no cell signal, no quick exit. That night, they stayed in the abandoned house, resting among relics that seemed to hum with memory. Anna couldn't sleep. She later said that the jungle sounded different that night, quieter, almost as if listening. The gramophone upstairs had long been broken, but once, near midnight, she swore she heard a faint echo of music drifting through the walls, a scratchy waltz, playing somewhere beneath the floorboards. When morning came, the first sunlight filtered through the broken shutters, revealing something they hadn't noticed before, writing on the underside of the cellar door. 3 words, carved with a knife, their letters trembling and uneven. Für die Zukunft, for the future. Chapter 3. The Secret in the Box. When the team finally dragged that metal box into the open, nobody said a word. It looked innocent enough. Just a rusted old thing with a heavy lock. But something about it felt wrong, like the air changed around it. Miguel joked that it was probably filled with gold, or bones, or maybe both. Nobody laughed. They set it down on the old kitchen table. Dust rose in a slow, lazy cloud. The kind of dust that's been waiting decades to breathe again. The lock gave out after a few hits with a chisel, and the lid came open with a metallic sigh, like the house itself exhaling. Inside were a few simple things: a folded letter, a small notebook, and a stack of yellowed photographs held together with a leather strap. No gold, no weapons, no piles of Nazi treasure, just paper. Anna flipped open the notebook first. Every page was filled with neat, careful handwriting. German, from what little she could make out. There were lists, sketches, coordinates, and strange Latin words scribbled in the margins. One section was titled Erbe, the German word for heritage. That's when they realized what they might have found wasn't personal. It was official. They passed around the photos. Most were from Europe. Bombed-out towns, burned train stations, people in uniforms. But some looked newer. South America. You could see palm trees, old cars, people smiling at barbecues in the 50s and 60s. At first it looked random, until Anna noticed a pattern. The same few faces kept showing up again and again. Older each time, always in different countries. One man in particular, Brenner. It hit them. He hadn't been hiding from the world. He'd been working with it. That sealed metal box wasn't his time capsule. It was a breadcrumb trail. The letter, though, was the real shocker. It was dated 1949 and addressed to a name the team didn't recognize. The translation was rough, but one sentence stood out. "The work continues here. The collection must never be lost. The others are already in Paraguay." That was it. Short, vague, but heavy. Like a secret whispered through time. Anna and the team didn't sleep that night. They sat around a lantern in the middle of that crumbling jungle house, reading through everything over and over again. The letter, the notebook, the map with Prague, circled in red. It all pointed to one thing. Brenner hadn't escaped the war. He'd simply relocated it. There was something he was protecting, or finishing, something tied to those boxes marked with the Ahnenerbe insignia. For those who don't know, the Ahnenerbe wasn't just a research department. It was basically the Nazi regime's version of a supernatural archive, a mix of archaeology, occult obsession, and pseudoscience. They hunted for relics, artifacts, anything they thought could prove or power their twisted ideology. And now, one of those men had built himself a vault in the middle of the South American jungle. The team agreed to call in authorities the next morning, but before they did, Anna went back down to the cellar one last time. She said it didn't feel right, like they'd missed something. Down there, it was still cold, still quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive. She swept her flashlight over the walls and noticed faint scratches in the plaster near the false wall. She leaned closer. It wasn't damage, it was carving. Letters. Dozens of them, barely visible, etched by hand. Most were initials, dates, fragments of words. But one stood out. The last line, written shakily, almost desperate. "If you find this, it's already begun." She didn't know what that meant. Nobody did. But when she read it out loud, Miguel swore he heard something shift in the darkness, like a board creaking under invisible weight. The next morning, when the officials arrived, the jungle felt different, colder somehow. The mist hung lower, thicker. They cataloged everything, sealed off the property, and the team was told not to speak publicly about what they'd found until the archives cleared it. They packed up, left the jungle, and for a while, it seemed like the story was over. But it wasn't, because a few weeks later, one of those same crates identical in design, markings, and contents, was found deep in the forests of Paraguay. Empty. And the location. Gah! It matched one of the coordinates from Brenner's notebook exactly. Chapter 4. The Last Secret. A month after the discovery in Argentina, the story had already started to fade from headlines. The historians had gone home. The crates had been taken by authorities, sealed in government storage, and Karl Brenner, whoever he truly was, slipped back into the fog of forgotten history. But then came the call. A local farmer, deep in eastern Paraguay, had reported strange metal boxes unearthed after a landslide near an abandoned church. The photos he sent matched perfectly. The same stenciled German markings, the same numbering style. Only this time, the box was open and empty. Anna and Miguel joined the follow-up team, now working quietly with South American and European archives. The coordinates from Brenner's notebook lined up almost too perfectly. When they reached the site, it was nothing like the overgrown quiet of the first house. This place felt used. The church was half collapsed, its walls covered in vines. Beneath it, a tunnel, crudely sealed, then broken open again. Inside, they found remnants of crates, torn paper, rusted tools. Whoever had been there hadn't been gone long. Anna picked up a fragment of a label that read, Sonderprojekt E, Erbe Archive. That same word again, Erbe, heritage. It wasn't treasure, it was a project. A few days later, a researcher from Berlin cross-referenced the names found in Brenner's files. Turns out, several of those faces in the photos weren't random refugees. They were engineers, scientists, and officers connected to experimental wartime programs. Some had vanished without a trace after 1945. Others were rumored to have worked for various foreign governments during the Cold War. Brenner hadn't just been protecting archives. He'd been building a network, a continuation of something that never officially ended. But here's the part that no one could explain. Among the sealed documents recovered from Brenner's house, there was a small envelope labeled, Zu öffnen, wenn alles verloren ist, to be opened when all is lost. It contained a single photograph, not of soldiers or relics or maps. It was a black and white picture of a modest house, the same one found in the jungle. Except this photo was taken in the 1950s, and standing in front of that house was a man who looked exactly like Brenner, smiling, holding hands with a woman and a young boy. It shouldn't have been possible. By that year, records showed Brenner was already dead, so either the man in that photo was someone else entirely, a copy, a twin, or someone carrying his name, or Brenner's story wasn't about running away. It was about restarting something. Anna didn't talk about it publicly, but in one interview years later, she said something that stuck with people. When asked what she thought Brenner's secret really was, she didn't say treasure or science or occult experiments. She said, I think his secret was that he never stopped believing he could finish what the war couldn't. And maybe he wasn't alone. To this day, the location of the other crates mentioned in his notebook remains unknown. Some say they were destroyed. Others believe they were moved, quietly, carefully, by people who still remember what Erbe meant, and that phrase carved under the cellar door, the one no one could explain. Für die Zukunft, for the future. It hits different now, doesn't it? Maybe Brenner's secret wasn't what he left behind. Maybe it was what he started. And somewhere out there, hidden under decades of silence and soil. The rest of it is still waiting to be found.